In the frozen north, where daylight fades like a whispered memory, Viking blacksmiths mastered a skill that seemed to defy the limits of human ability. They controlled fire without relying on the tools most civilizations considered essential. To them, flame was neither a resource nor a hazard. It was a living force that answered only to those who understood its breath, its hunger, and its moods. In winter, when forges glowed against snow-choked winds, travelers claimed the smiths were bending fire with bare hands, coaxing it higher with nothing more than breath and instinct. And though legend often exaggerates, the truth is even more astonishing. These men learned to command heat through knowledge carved from generations of necessity, survival, and closeness to the elements that shaped their world. Inside a Viking forge, shadows clung to the timber walls like soot turned alive, and every breath carried the metallic tang of iron warming beneath the coals. The space felt more like a cave than a workshop, lit only by the pulse of orange embers beating at the heart of the room. Smoke curled through gaps in the thatched roofing, drifting upward like wandering spirits, while the rhythmic clang of hammer against metal echoed across the settlement. Here, the forge was more than a workplace. It was a sanctuary where fire shaped destiny. Every Viking tool, blade, and rivet began in this dim chamber, and the smith stood at the center of it all, reading firelight as clearly as others read runes. To the Vikings, fire was never a mindless element, but a creature with temperament, behavior, and will. They spoke of it as if it listened, flaring when angered, softening when soothed, needing to be fed with precision rather than force. Inside the forge, the smith watched every flicker with the patience of a hunter reading tracks in snow, knowing each shift in color or sway of smoke revealed the fire's mood. If the flames danced too wildly, the metal blistered. If they sulked low, the iron deadened. Controlling fire meant recognizing its language, one learned not through instruction but through countless hours of trial, blistered skin, and quiet observation. The smiths believed that understanding fire required humility, acknowledging that mastery came not from dominating the flame, but from cooperating with its living spirit. The secret the Viking blacksmiths guarded most closely was not a tool or a technique, but the mastery of their own breath. Without bellows, they learned to bend low over the coals, cupping their hands to form a narrow tunnel of air, exhaling in slow, measured bursts that awakened the fire without scattering it. Some used hollowed animal bones or clay tubes to focus their breath like primitive blowpipes, directing oxygen precisely where the embers needed to flow. The method looked deceptively simple, yet it demanded lung strength forged through years of repetition and burns endured without complaint. Too strong a breath and the fire spat sparks, too gentle and the flame starved. Through disciplined rhythm, inhale, lean, exhale, they shaped heat as if guiding a wild animal, turning raw instinct into an art that rivaled any crafted device. A Viking smith's body was as much a tool as his anvils and hammers, conditioned to endure heat that would send others retreating. He leaned so close to the forge that the hair on his forearms curled from the warmth, yet he never flinched, reading the temperature not with gauges but with skin, breath, and instinct. His posture shifted constantly, shoulders angled to funnel air, chest expanding to deliver a steady plume of oxygen, eyes narrowed to read the subtle rise of sparks. Each movement shaped the flame's behavior, forming an unspoken dialogue between man and fire. Over time, the smith's senses sharpened beyond ordinary human limits. He could hear the faint hiss that warned of overheating, or feel a shift in warmth, signaling the moment the iron reached its ideal glow. In this intimate dance, body and forge became a single living system. What fueled this intimate mastery was not magic, but an understanding of wood and earth refined through generations. Viking blacksmiths selected fuels with the precision of alchemists, knowing birch bark ignited quickly, pine resin burned hot, and charcoal made from slow smoldered hardwood produced a steady, controllable heat. They mixed these materials in layered beds, adjusting the burn by adding peat for longer endurance or splintered twigs for sudden intensity. Though they lacked scientific terms, they understood combustion at a practical level. How moisture in wood dulled a flame, how airflow shaped temperature, how bog iron ore responded differently from mined iron when heated. Every choice of fuel altered the forge's character, allowing the smith to manipulate fire not through tools, but through the elemental chemistry of the north itself. To guide metal without tools, Viking blacksmiths relied on their eyes more than anything forged in iron. They watched the shifting colors within the heated steel, first a dull red, then a deeper cherry hue, and finally a bright orange that signaled the metal was soft enough to shape. These shades formed a language of their own, a temperature map visible only to those who had stared into a forge long enough to memorize every subtle transition. Without thermometers or precise instruments, the smith judged perfection by how the glow pulsed, how the surface rippled under heat, and how the iron scent changed as it neared its working point. Even a moment too long in the flame risked brittleness, so timing became instinct sharpened by years of repetition. In this glowing spectrum, the smith read the life of the metal itself. Among their most ingenious methods was something the Vikings called the whispering coals, a technique that used the forge's own structure to guide air without a single crafted device. The smith arranged stones, hardened clay, or carved wooden channels around the fire, creating narrow passages that pulled in cold air from the outside like a natural bellows. As wind slipped through these gaps, it fed the embers with just enough oxygen to intensify the heat without losing control. The effect was subtle, a soft hiss, a gentle rise in flame but powerful enough to shape iron for weapons and tools alike. By adjusting the angle of each stone or widening a clay groove with his fingers, the smith could change the fire's strength instantly. It was engineering disguised as instinct, a quiet genius born from watching nature and learning to bend it. But even mastery carried danger, for fire could betray a careless moment. A forge that burned too hot could cause the iron to crack from sudden expansion, while flames fed unevenly could twist metal beyond repair. Sparks leapt unpredictably, burrowing into wool tunics or scorching exposed skin, and collapsing coals sometimes trapped pockets of heat strong enough to blister a palm instantly. The greatest threat came from thermal shock, when cold iron met blazing coals too quickly, sending a sharp snap through the workshop as the metal fractured like ice under pressure. Every Viking smith carried scars from these lessons, thin white lines across fingers, darkened patches on forearms, marks that proved survival as much as skill. Fire demanded vigilance, reminding the smith that control was never absolute, only borrowed for as long as he stayed attentive. For every seasoned master, there was always a young apprentice standing nearby, eyes wide, learning not just technique but temperament. The old smith never shouted, never forced the flame. Instead, he demonstrated patience, showing that fear tightened the breath while calm made it steady. The apprentice mimicked his movements, leaning in, cupping his hands, directing air toward the embers with a controlled exhale. Yet the fire often rebelled, flickering wildly or fading to nothing. Only when the boy understood that fire responded to intention as much as breath did the coals begin to brighten under his guidance. In this exchange, knowledge flowed silently from elder to youth. Mastery came not from dominating the flame, but from respecting its nature, trusting instinct, and letting practice shape confidence. Each morning before the settlement stirred, the Viking smith performed a quiet ritual that marked the beginning of his craft. He knelt beside the cold hearth, brushing aside yesterday's ash to reveal the faintest trace of surviving embers, tiny red eyes buried beneath gray dust. With a pinch of pine resin and a handful of dry tinder, he coaxed those embers back to life, breathing gently until a thin ribbon of smoke curled upward. The forge awakened slowly, like a beast stretching from sleep, and the first sparks glowed against the pre-dawn gloom. This ritual was both practical and sacred. Conserving fire meant conserving labor, but it also honored the belief that each flame carried memory from the day before. As the settlement's roofs turned gold with sunrise, the heart of the forge was already beating strong. The weapons born from this disciplined partnership between smith and flame shaped the fate of Viking expeditions across seas and frozen frontiers. Blades tempered through careful heat control resisted the biting cold that made lesser metal brittle, and axes forged with steady, even flames held their edges through salt spray and rain. Without precise tools, the smith relied on intuition to balance hardness and flexibility, creating iron that could withstand both battle and harsh northern weather. Every sword that crossed an ocean, every rivet securing a longship's frame, carried the imprint of fire guided by breath and instinct. In this way, the quiet labor inside a smoky forge fueled the strength of entire armies, proving that craftsmanship could be as decisive as courage in the shaping of history. Forging in winter demanded an even deeper understanding of flame, for the cold northern air threatened to smother every spark the moment it rose. A lesser craftsman would see his fire falter, while the Viking smith learned to use the chill to his advantage. He positioned his body to shield the coals from sudden gusts, adjusting the fuel mixture so the heat tunneled upward with greater intensity. Cold air sharpened the contrast between ember and shadow, allowing him to read temperature with uncanny accuracy. Even the ringing of metal changed pitch in the frozen months, guiding his hammer strokes as he shaped glowing iron against anvil stone chilled by frost. In this hostile season, the forge became both refuge and battleground, where mastery meant turning winter itself into a silent partner. As dusk settled over the settlement, the smith performed the final task of the day, preserving the forge's light for tomorrow. He spread the coals wide, letting them cool just enough before gathering them into a tight cluster at the center of the hearth. With practiced motions, he sprinkled sand over the embers, smothering flame but trapping heat, then sealed the mound with ash to slow its fading breath. It was a delicate balance. Too much sand and the heart would die, too little and it would flare unpredictably in the night. When the last glow dimmed beneath its protective shell, the smith placed his hand close, feeling a faint warmth that promised renewal. This last ember test was a ritual of both caution and continuity, ensuring that tomorrow's fire would rise from today's final spark. In the end, the Viking blacksmith's legacy was not merely the weapons he forged or the tools he shaped, but the rare mastery he held over the most unpredictable element in his world. Long before bellows became common, these flame tamers learned to command fire with breath, instinct, and a partnership born from respect rather than dominance. Their forges glowed at the center of every settlement, small sanctuaries where knowledge passed quietly from elder to apprentice, each generation refining the ancient dialogue between man and flame. And though centuries have buried their names, the principles they lived by still echo through modern metallurgy. Read the heat, trust your senses, and understand that true mastery begins where tools end.